Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Can't Use Real Data, Mockaroo It. My name is Sophie Sparks. I'm the Community Manager here at the Information Lab, and it's just lovely to have you joining us today. We have Bethany Fox, who is one of our senior consultants here at the Information Lab. And we're really lucky to have Bethany join us because she is soon off to Australia, my home country, to become the new Data Schools head coach at our Sydney office. So I'm very, very jealous that she gets to be going to Australia. And we're really lucky to have her before she flies out. Today's webinar has been recorded, and I will post a link to it probably within 24 hours, So you'll get a link tomorrow sometime with a link to the recording. If you do have any questions for Beth, please type them into the chat box and she'll be able to answer them for you. So with that, Beth, can you take over the screen and let's get started?
Oh, well, thank you very much, Sophie. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining. Just before we start, this is going to be a hands-on session, so hopefully you'll be able to follow along with me. So if you could go to mockaroo.com, that's Mockaroo with an A, not an E, and go and create your own account there. So you won't be able to follow along with this unless you've got your own account. It is free, so you can just use the free account. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, go ahead to mockaroo.com and create your own account. All right, so just whilst you guys are doing that, I'm just going to quickly explain what we're going to do today. So I'll give you a little tour around Mockaroo so you can see what it is and the various different things that you can do with it. And then we are going to create two different data sources in Mockaroo, so two different schemas, and we're going to link them using a specific linking field. So that's one great thing about Mockaroo is that you can obviously create quite realistic real life data, obviously with it still being fake. And then in real life, a lot of the time you've got those kind of linking ID fields, and you can use those within Mockaroo to create two separate data sources that actually speak to each other. Okay, so hopefully you have all got your Mockaroo account now. So this is going to be the first schema that we'll create together. So essentially what we're going to do is create this fictional superstore. So we're going to have two different data sets. The first one is just going to be everything to do with that superstore. So the store ID, the store name, a little bit of information about the owner. So their first name, last name, and their full name, including a title. I want their email and the location of the store itself. So we've got this schema on the screen right now, and I want it to look exactly like these example values here. So we'll be trying to fit this exactly to what we have. And then the next thing we'll do after that is an orders data set. So using the store IDs that we've just created, we're going to create some information about various different customers, and they will have all had an order, and we'll give them some sales values as well. And we'll be doing that using some distributions. So it's going to look slightly more realistic than just a random value. Okay, so let's get started. So hopefully you've all got Mockaroo now. And if you sign in, you will get your home screen will look a little bit like this. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick tour around what we've got on the screen. So your home screen is going to be your kind of default schema. So this is where we can start to build out various different schemas. Obviously, we're going to be creating the Superstore one in a second. But up at the top, you've got a few different tabs here. So you've got your schemas tab. This is where you can save some schemas. You can see I've got a few different ones here. You have your datasets tab. This is where you can upload some data into Mockaroo to then reference in a new schema. You can also create some mock APIs. We're not going to be looking at this today, so we'll look at everything else, but we'll just be leaving out this. So you can definitely go and YouTube this if you want to after the session, because there is some information on that, but we'll just be leaving the APIs out for today. We will be creating some scenarios. So this is basically where you can create some numeric values or sample some numeric values from some distributions, either a normal or a Poisson distribution, and you can reference that in another schema. And then your projects up at the top, as the name suggests, this is basically where you can save a load of schemas and kind of group them all together. And if you want to, you can go ahead and share that with however many emails you want. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the schemas tab and we'll get started. So you've all got the free version of Mockaroo. So that means that you can actually create, you can download a data set with up to 1,000 rows in that data set. If you do want more, then you can pay for a Mockaroo account, which is just $50 a year. And I'm not sure what the limit is actually once you've got it paid, but it's definitely a lot more than 1,000. So if you do want to do that, then go ahead. But a lot of the time, just the free version is absolutely fine. Okay, so this is the default schema. Now, what I tend to do, just so I don't get confused with what I've actually created and what the default values are, I actually tend to just go ahead and get rid of all of these to start off with. So on the right-hand side of each of these different rows for your different field names, you've got a little cross there. So if you just go ahead and click on all of the crosses, maybe apart from the top one, and then we can make our schema from scratch. Okay, so what I've got on the screen at the moment is just my field name, which is ID and row number. So these are the two sort of the default, or the one, sorry, default ID value that will be up there. Okay, and I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint, and this is what we're aiming for. So I'm just going to go ahead and split screen so you can keep an eye on what we're going to be creating together. Zoom in on this. Okay. So first things first, we want our store ID. So the default ID that we've got in here will be absolutely fine. So I'm just going to rename this just to have store ID like so. So you can copy this as I go along. So the first column in my schema is going to be the field name. Obviously, this is what we're going to call our field. The second column in my schema is going to be the data type. Now, the default value here is going to be row number, so I will leave it as that. But just so you can see all of the other different data types that we have, if you just click where it says row number, and it will bring up this other window, and if you just scroll down, there are an absolute load of different data types that you can add in here. So we'll be exploring a few of these today, definitely not all of them, because as you can see, there are quite a few here. But if you don't know exactly what the data type is called that you want, you can also search for a type up here. So if I wanted to just search for ID, for example, you can then see that I've got a few different types of ID that I could pick from. But I'm just going to keep it as a row number or my record number. So I'll just click off this, and I've just got my store ID, which is data type, row number, and that's all I'm going to do for now. I can see that I've just got a message in the chat, so let me just check that out. Oh, that's from Sophie. Thanks, Sophie. She's just sharing my my Twitter and LinkedIn details there if you want to follow me. Okay, cool. So on the right-hand side of our data type there, we have a couple of options. So the first one here is we can set a certain percentage of our records to be blank if we want. So a lot of the time with realistic data, you don't always have every single field completely full. So if you're wanting to replicate that, you can put a percentage in here to have a certain percentage just with no values in. I'm going to leave it as 0% for now, just for ease. And then the one just on the right hand side of that, you've got this formula window. So I'm going to leave it for now. We will be coming into formulas in a second. But what you can do with Mockaroo, if you can't find a specific data type that you want, a lot of the time you can create it via formulas. So the type of code that Mockaroo uses is called Ruby code. And when you click on that formula number or that formula icon, sorry, you can see on the right hand side just a load of different formulas. So it'll explain each of those different formulas there that we might want to use. But I'll just click cancel because again, I'm just going to keep my store ID just as it is. Okay, so I'm going to add another field now. So you can click on the add another field button just below store ID. And then every single time you add a new field to your schema, it's just going to copy from the row before. So you can see we've now got this store ID, which is duplicated. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and edit this. So the next field that I'm wanting in my schema on the right-hand side is going to be store name. Okay, so I'll just rename my field name there to be store name. And in my type, there's not actually a store name kind of data type here, obviously. So I'm going to try and find something which would be a good replacement. And what I'm going to use in this case is something called company name. So if I just start to write in company, we can see that I have a company name field here. So it's got a few example values of Google, Home Depot, General Electric. So I'm going to click on company name, and that is what I'm going to have as my store name. Okay, so nice and simple. I'm going to do the store owner first name and the store owner last name. So that's very, very much like the previous two rows. They're quite easy fields. So they're going to be the sort of more simple inputs. And then when we get down to the full name, that's when it's going to get a little bit more interesting. So let's just add another field. And this is going to be my store owner first name. The data type in this case, so if I start to type name, you'll see it again, there's a whole load of different names here. And I'm just going to scroll down and then I can find my first name field. Now, what you also have is some sort of more specific types of first names. So you might just want females, you might just want males, you might just want European names or Chinese names, but I'm just going to use the general first name field there. So that's going to be a mix of everything. And then I'm going to repeat that as well. So I'm going to change that from a first name. So I'm adding a new field here. I'm going to have store owner last name. And then again, my data type in this case is going to be last name. Okay, so hopefully you've all got those 4 fields there, nice and simple. Now, you might have noticed, if I just go back onto my data types here, you might have noticed that I do have a full name option. So you might be wondering why I'm not using that, given that one of the fields I want to create is my store owner full name. So the reason why I'm not going to use that is because I actually want to have a title in front of my name. So you can see on the right hand side, I've got Dr. Joe Bloggs. So I might want a Mr. or a Ms. or a Mrs. or whatever that may be. So that isn't actually included in the full name data field. So that's why I'm not going to use that. And I also want to have my first name and my last name in their own separate columns. Okay. Cool. So I want to create my full name now. And part of that is obviously the title, as I've said. So I'm going to add in another field, and this is going to create my title. So I'm just going to call this title and go onto the data type and search for title. And there we have it. So it's just the one on the right hand side there. And another thing that you can do as you're creating these schemas, if you just want to double check things, is have a look at your preview. So at the very bottom of your screen right now, next to the download data, you should have a preview option. So if you click on that, what it will do is just open up a little preview of your data so we can see all the different types of title that we have. Now, what it tries to do and what it tends to do usually quite successfully is sort of match the title to the gender of the name of the person. So we might have, let me see if I can find one here. We've got a Glenn. Actually, it's not done it so well this time round. So sometimes it's not always. We've got a Carrie who's a Mrs. So that's probably a good one. But we also have a Glenn who's a Ms. So obviously, like that can happen also. But typically, it will try and kind of match them. But as you can see, we've got a whole load of different titles here. So they're not all completely gendered. You've got honorable and doctor and reverend as well. So you've got a nice mix of everything. And we can see our different store names here as well. So they're quite random, some of these names. But if you're not a fan of any of those, you can also go and change them. Okay, so I'm going to cancel out of that preview and continue now. So I've got this title and I've got my first name and I've got my last name as well. So I want to try and combine all of these different things now to have my store owner full name. So I'll add another field and this time I'll write it out. So I've got store owner full name as my field name. And now I actually want to create a new field using these upper 3 here. So my data type in this case is going to be a formula. So you can search for formula up at the top right and select that. And this is where we're going to be using our Ruby code. Now, obviously, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ruby code. I certainly wasn't until I started using Mockaroo. But you've got this little question mark on the right-hand side, which is really useful. So if on the left-hand side now, you can scroll down and have a look at all of the different fields or formulas that you might want to use. But I'm just going to, just for kind of example's sake, I'm not going to use any of this just to start off with. Okay, I'm going to type out what I think would typically be the formula you would do for concatenating string fields. Okay, so I'm just going to start typing this out. So I would have my title, and then usually if you're going to concatenate string fields, you would have a plus symbol and then maybe a space in quotation marks, and then another plus symbol. And then it'll be my store owner first name, and then again another plus and some quotation marks and a space, and then my store owner last name. Now you might have already tried this and you might see where I'm going to go wrong here. So this is going to give me an error. So if I have a look at my preview now, and then on the right hand side, I can see that there is a syntax error in the formula. So there's something going on that I've done wrong here. It's not going to work. So you can try and sort of play around with it and try a few different things. So maybe if you're used to using Tableau, you might want, or Alteryx, you might want to have the square brackets in there. So let's try that. I can put my title and wrap that into some square brackets. Same with my first name there. And then same with my last name down at the end. Okay, so let's see if that works. So I can go on to preview and scroll across. And again, I can see it's got another error now, but this error is slightly more useful. So what it will try to do is give you a little hint. If you've got something wrong, it will try and tell you why and how to fix that. So I can see that I need to use this function here, this field function, in order to access my field title because it starts with an uppercase letter. So basically, if you've got any fields which start with an uppercase letter or that have spaces in, you will need to actually wrap it in a function itself in order for Mockaroo to recognize that as a field as opposed to some sort of text or function in its own right. Okay, so let's do that. So let's cross out of here. So I'm going to remove my square brackets. What I actually want to have is field and then an open curved bracket. And then the field name I'm going to have in quotation marks. Okay, and then the concatenation, I'm still going to leave like that. So it's still going to have a plus and then a space within quotation marks and then another plus. And then I'll wrap my store in a first name in a brackets and some quotes again. And then I will do the same for my last name. Okay, so hopefully we'll have something looking a little bit like this. I'll just copy this and put it in the chat just so it's easy for you guys to copy. There you go. So hopefully this will work. All right, so now what we'll do, let's have a look at the preview and hopefully that will have put all of those three different fields together and we can see that has worked. So that's good there. All right, so that is one way of using your various different fields to create a new field. But we've got one problem here in that we now have this title column. And if I look at my desired schema on the right-hand side, I don't have that title column there. But I needed it in order to create my full name. So now I've used it, I actually want to get rid of it before I download it. And the way you can do that in Mockaroo is if I go to my title field name, and if I just add 2 underscores before title, then what Mockaroo will do is no longer include that in my preview or in my download, but it will still create it so I can use it elsewhere. Okay, so I just need to make sure that I also update the formula for the store owner full name. So where I've got field title, I'm going to add those 2 underscores in front of the title again. So now if I have a look at preview, I can see I no longer have that title field, but it's still being used in order to create my store owner full name. Okay, so that's trick number 1. That is one way of creating a field without actually having part of that field as a separate column. Okay, so hopefully we've all got that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is create an email for our store owners. So let's add another field. And this is going to be my store owner. In fact, I'm just going to call it email. And if I have a look at my data types, I can search for an email and there is one there, but that, as you can see, will just use like your standard kind of email addresses like Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, whatever it may be. Whereas in actual fact, if I again look at my schema, what I want it to do is take the store name and use that as part of my email. So I've got Tesco here, for example. So I want to use whatever store name that Mockaroo is creating and have that as part of the email at the end. I've already got my store name because obviously that is one of my fields already. So the next thing I need to create is just the first part of that email. So it'll be some kind of combination of their first initial and their last name, and then maybe a couple of numbers, something like that. So there is a field in Mockaroo that I'm going to use for this. So if we go back to our data type again, and this field that I'll be using as part of my email address is called username. So if you search for username, and we can click on that. And this might seem a little bit weird because our field name in this case is going to be email, but the type is username. So we're actually missing that email part at the end. But what I can do is update whatever I've created here in the formula option. So you can click on that little formula symbol there. And the way that it does it, or the way that Mockaroo will kind of calculate these things, is first thing it does is create the field name. So I've got my email. The second thing it does is create that type, so the username, and then it will either get rid of some if you've got a percentage of them are blank, or it will update whatever it's created from your data type by putting it through your formula. So this is what we're going to do. So if I want to update whatever Mockaroo has created, the way I reference the current thing that I'm on is this. So I can just type in this, and you can see we've got a few examples here on the right hand side. So if you do forget any of this, it's fine. You've obviously got this whole entire list over here. Okay, so I want to have whatever the username is that Mockaroo has created. So that is being pulled through by the word this, and then I'm going to add. So again, concatenating things here. So I'll add an @ symbol, and then I put another plus. And then I'm going to use my store name. So we'll have to wrap that in a field function again. And then at the end of that, in quotation marks again, I'm just going to put a .com. All right, so this is reading as this plus @ in quotation marks plus the field store name in quotation marks plus .com in quotes. All right, so again, I'll copy that across and put that in the chat just so we can make sure we haven't got any typos. Okay, and then hit apply. So let's have a look at our preview. And I can see that has worked just as I wanted it to. So we have some sort of combination of the first initial and the last name, maybe a number occasionally, and then at the storename.com. Okay, so even though in my email field, I actually use the username field, I can see that it's not just going to give me the username, so I can update it as I'm creating it. So there are two ways there that we've seen of using a field, but not pulling it through as its own column. So we've got the underscore option or the updating it as you're creating it option. All right, and the next things that we're going to create is some geographical information. So let's add another field. The first one's going to be country. And my data type here is going to be country. I can either have my normal country, so the full word, or I can have a country code. I'm going to select the full word country here. And you have the option now to restrict to specific countries. So obviously, if you're trying to replicate some data that you might have in your own company, you might not have every single country in the world that you would use. So you can restrict it to whatever countries you want here. So I'm going to restrict it to the United Kingdom and Ireland, just for the sake of this demo. And then I'm going to add another field, which will be city. So one really cool thing that Mockaroo does is it's not going to give me a city which isn't in the country that it's first created in the row above. So if I have a look at my preview now and scroll across to the right, I can see, and I don't know cities and islands that well, but I can see here that we've got Bristol is in the United Kingdom, and I know that I wouldn't find Bristol anywhere against Ireland in this whole entire data set. Okay, so it does have that ability to try and match your countries to your cities. So we're not going to have like Paris in Ireland, for example. Okay, then we'll add another field. This one is going to be street. And I can search for street in my data type search there. And again, there are a few options here. So what I'm actually going to use is street address, but we could, if we wanted to, have an individual street number and street name. The street address is street number and street name put together. But if you wanted them separate, a little bit like what we've done with the first name and the last name, if we wanted them together, we could have had full name, or you can have them separate. But we're just going to use the street address in this case. Like so. All right, so that is pretty much the whole entire schema that we need for our superstore. We do have one more field that we're going to include though, and that is the frequency field down here. Now, this won't make too much sense right now. Hopefully it will do in a second. But essentially what the frequency field does is when we upload this data set back into Mockaroo, when we reference it in another schema, it's going to reference the records which have a higher number in that frequency column more than it does with the records which might have a lower frequency number. So it's basically just a way of ensuring that you've got some superstores in this case which will have more orders and some which will have less. If we didn't have that frequency column in there, it would just be random, so they would all have a fairly similar amount of orders. Okay, so we'll just add another field. This is going to be frequency. And then this is just going to be again, it's going to be a number here. So we'll pick that number. And you can leave it as whatever you want. We can leave it as a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 100. So that means if we've got one store which has got a frequency of 100 and one store which has got a frequency of 1, the store which has got a frequency of 100 is kind of going to be referenced maybe 100 times more than the other store that's got a frequency of 1. Nice and simple. Okay, now what we can do is tell Mockaroo how many stores do we want to create. So I'm just going to create 50 stores. So down at the bottom, you'll see you'll have a number of rows option here, which is going to be 50. So we can add that in just like so. You can also pick various different formats. I'm going to leave mine as a CSV, but as you can see, there are a few different ways that you can download this. And that's it. So that's all we're going to do for this. What we can do now is save this schema. So if I ever wanted to return to the schema at another date and download it again, I could do that. So let's click on Save the Schema down at the very bottom there. And I'm going to call this Superstore. You can see I've got a few different names that I've used in the past there. Okay, so I'll click Save. And there we have it. So now let's download this data. So again, down at the bottom left, you'll have that button to download your data, and that'll just go straight into your downloads. And if you've saved the schema before you download it, it will download it with the name of your schema. So you can see I've got superstore.csv there. Okay, cool. So does anybody have any questions to this point? So this is all we're going to do with this initial schema. And if you don't have any questions, we'll move on to the next one. But I'll just pause for a couple of seconds here. If you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat. Okay, cool. Looks like we're good. Sweet, so I've now downloaded that data, and in order for me to reference it in the next schema that I'm going to create, which is going to be this orders one here, I need to re-upload it. I need to bring it back into Mockaroo. Okay. So if I go to the datasets tab up at the very top there, I can see I've got a few different ones that I've already uploaded here. But you probably won't have any if this is the first time that you've used Mockaroo. So we can just go ahead and upload a data set here. So click on that button. I'm going to call it Superstore. And then you can select a file. So I can go into my downloads. And you can just select the Superstore that you've just downloaded, like so. Okay, so I'll save that, but just before I do, if you just scroll down here, you can now see the description for why we've got that frequency column. So it's a controlling distribution, and we can see in this top example here, we've got two different makes of car. We've got Ford and BMW. And when I reference them in another data set, I just want all of the Fords to be referenced like 4 times as often as BMW, for example, and I don't want to take the model into account. If I went one level further and then I took the model into account, I can see that I've now got different frequency values for the make and the model. So hopefully, if you read this, that will make slightly more sense. But essentially, the values which have got or the records which have got a high frequency value, it just means that they're going to get referenced more often than the ones with a lower frequency value. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click Save Dataset, and then I can now see it in my list of saved datasets. Okay, so I'm going to start creating this orders schema now. So let's go back into schemas up at the top, and I can create a new schema. Again, it's going to populate it with all those default schema values, which I don't want. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all but one, just so I don't get confused as to the ones that I've actually created and the ones which were default ones. So the first thing we're wanting to create here is order ID. So let's go ahead and call this order ID. The type in this case is going to be this long string here. So it's just a random string. So I can search for ID, and it's going to be this GUID field value that we have. So I can click on that. And there we go. So nice and simple. That's the first one done. So let's add another field. And this is going to be order date. So let's search in our data type for date, and we can see we've got this date time field. So I can add that in. Now, what you can do is restrict your records to only be between a certain, like 2 certain dates. So what it'll do automatically is just take the last year. So I can see this is going to take the 21st of the 6th, 2020 to 21st of the 6th, 2021. So I can leave that just so it's fine. Works as just the previous year. But what I don't like is the format of this date. So I'm not in America. I don't use the whole month first, then day, then year. So I can switch this to be something which I would recognize more myself. So I could either do year, dash mm, dash dd, which is quite a standard type of date there. Or I could use what I've got as my system date format, which is my dd/mm/year. So I can use that, but you can use whichever you want. It doesn't really matter. So now if I have a look at my preview, I can see that it's kind of switched the month and the day around to be what I would be used to seeing. Okay, cool. So let's add another field, and this one's going to be store ID. So this is where we're wanting to reference that data set that we've just uploaded. So I'll call this store ID. And in my type, if I look for a data set, so let's search for data set in the data type field, there is an option there for data set column. So if you select that, you'll now have 2 drop downs. So I've got the select a data set drop down. You can see that I've got obviously a few in there. You'll probably only have one. So just make sure you click on Superstore or whatever you saved it as. And I want to reference my store ID. So mine's automatically populated with store ID there, just because that's the first field in that data set. But just make sure that you're selecting the correct one. So the next drop down is a little bit counterintuitive because we're going to select the random option. And this drop down is basically where you can tell Mockaroo how you want to sample that store ID. So the first one is random. As the name suggests, it says choose values randomly. The next one down is custom. This is where we can create a custom distribution based on the field that we're getting. And then we've got sequential and Cartesian. So sequential would just be go down through each of the 50 store IDs, and once it's done all 50, it would start repeating them again. And then Cartesian is if you've got 2 fields within Mockaroo which are both as sequential, or 1 field above, sorry, which is sequential, then it will kind of go down and repeat that first one until it needs to start again, and it will do for your second field the same thing until your first one's finished repeating, and then it will go on to the next value for your second field. So hopefully that makes sense, but it kind of cycle around so you get all of the different options possible. We're going to use random, and this might seem a little bit strange because obviously I've been talking about that frequency column that we had in our data set. So if you have a frequency column in your saved data set, if you select random here for the way to to pull from that data set, it actually isn't random. It will be using that frequency column. So it might seem a little bit counterintuitive to pick random there, but it will be referencing that frequency column as opposed to it being fully random. So on that note, if in your data that you've uploaded, you actually want to have a field called frequency and you don't want it to act like a frequency when you're pulling from it, then maybe just call it something different to start off with. And then if you want to later down the line, you can change it once you've downloaded it. But if you have anything with that field name frequency, it is going to use it if you're ever going to reference from that data set in another schema. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to leave that as random. Obviously, it's not random, as I've just said. And then let's add another field. So this one is going to be customer name. Okay, so if you might have been thinking ahead as to how this is going to look when we download everything. And obviously in a real life data set, you would have multiple orders for a customer. Maybe that customer would go to multiple different stores. Maybe they'd have multiple different categories of order. And if we wanted to do that, we could do. But just for today, just for the demonstration, what we'll actually be creating is just this orders schema will have one row per customer per order, and in that order they will just have one category. So it's not going to be the most realistic type of data, I guess, because you might want to repeat your customer names. But if you did want to do that, you could just create your own customer name data set and then reference that and have it pull multiple different times. So as I said, you would probably want to create a few more tables if you were going to do this slightly more realistically. But just for the demonstration for today, we will just be having a Superstore data set, and our orders data set will just have one row per customer, per order, per store. Okay, so for our customer name, our data type in this case is going to be name, and I will just be using the full name here. And then our customer age. So let's rename this, add another field. It's going to be our customer age. And this one's going to be slightly different. So we could just put a random number in here if we wanted to. But obviously you're going to have various different ages or various sort of a distribution of ages that come to a superstore. So you're not going to have that many people who order from your superstore being from the age of, like, I don't know, 0 to 18, for example. You're also not going to have many people over the age of maybe 90 or 100. So you'll want to try and replicate or sort of fake what a real customer age distribution would look like. And typically in your sort of natural distributions, you would want to use a normal distribution for that. So that nice bell curve that we'd have. Okay, so because I'm wanting to reference a distribution, if I go to my data type, I can search for normal, and I've got my normal distribution there. Just to show you though, there are a few different distribution fields. So all of these different distribution fields will have their own use case. So a normal distribution, as I've said, we're going to be using that for age because it's got that nice kind of bell curve, which is typically what you would expect. But you might be wanting to distribute or to sample from a slightly different distribution for a different purpose. So if you're wanting to maybe, I don't know, take or create a data set which is looking at the number of people that go into your store every day, you might want to use a Poisson distribution because that is a count distribution. So each of these different distributions will have their own purpose. And depending on what you're trying to replicate, maybe just Google these different options here so you can pick the best one. But for age, we're going to be using a normal distribution. Okay, so for each of those different distribution types, what you will also have to input here are your parameters for that distribution. So for the normal one, we'll have to input our mean, so our average age, and then our standard deviation. So I'll quickly explain what those two things are. Obviously, you'll know what an average is. So this is just going to be the average age of customer that orders from our store. So I'm going to have that in as 50. Okay, so we're going to say that roughly the sort of majority of people are around the age of 50, so that's going to be the peak of that bell curve. And then the standard deviation is one way you kind of need to think about this a little bit. So if I just bring on a picture here, just to show you this. Okay, so when you're referencing from a normal distribution, you've obviously got your mean value in the middle here. So that's what we've got as 50. But then one standard deviation away from that mean is going to have about 68.2% of your data is going to be within that range. So if we've got our mean of 50, if we had our standard deviation of 10, then around 68.2% of the records that we generate will be between 40 and 60. So that's one standard deviation away from the mean. Then you'll have about 95% of your data, of the records that we generate, will be between 2 standard deviations away from the mean. So again, if we've got 10, which is our standard deviation, and our mean, which is 50, then it's going to go from 30 to 60, 30 to 70 even. So hopefully you're starting to kind of get the trends now, but then if you wanted to have 99% of your data would be within 3 standard deviations away from the mean. So when you're thinking about this, try and think about what a realistic parameter would be for your standard deviation and your mean. Don't go crazy. Obviously if we had our standard deviation as 100, then it means we'd be very, very likely to get a lot of values which would be negative, and obviously no one's got a negative age. So try and think about this. You might want to do a few trial and errors. That's absolutely fine, obviously. But I'm just going to put in our standard deviation of 10 here. Okay, so that means that we're going to have 99% of the observations that we're going to pull are going to be between the ages of 20 and 80. So I think that's quite a good range of age there. Okay, and then our category. So let's add another field. This is going to be the category of order that they've had. So let's call this category. And in this case, I can see that I've got 3 different categories that I want to create. So I've got technology, groceries, and clothing. So I don't want Mockaroo to randomly create these. I want to use the ones that I've got there. So in my type, I'm just going to search for a list. So it's just going to be this custom list here. And then we can just type them in just as they are. So let's go for technology, then groceries, then clothing. So it's all just separated by that column, by that comma even. Okay, so obviously in a superstore, you're probably going to have more groceries orders than you are technology orders, and your technology orders are going to be they're going to be a bigger sales value, but they're not going to be as often as your groceries. So I want to try and replicate that kind of behavior within this data set. So I don't want to randomly pick from these 3 different options. I want to actually pick the distribution. So we can do that. Again, if you go on that random drop down, I can create a custom distribution. So the way to then create that custom distribution is by clicking on the little bar chart icon that will pop up next to it. So if you click on that, and then the way to create this distribution is you need to give it some kind of rule. So if you wanted to, you could have that reference another column within your data. So say if we had our country in here, our store country, we could say if the country equals Ireland, then maybe you'll have more technology orders than you would groceries, or more clothing orders than you would groceries. And if it's in the UK, maybe they don't sell technology at all. So you could have technology here as 0. But I actually don't want it to reference any other field. I just want it to do it across the whole entire data set. So the way you do that is you still need to have a Boolean value in that rule there. So I'm just going to have it as true. So my rule is everything is true. So this next distribution is going to apply to every single row. Okay, and then this kind of works quite similar to the frequency column that we were speaking about. So basically at the moment, you can see that they're all 1, which means that they would all be referenced an equal amount of times. And what you can actually do is just change these values. So if I had my technology as 1 and my groceries as, I don't know, maybe 6, and then my clothing as 3, then I would have roughly for every 1 technology order that I would have about 6 groceries orders and 3 clothing orders. So what I tend to try and do here, and you don't need to do this, but it helps me think about things, is have these values either add up to 10 or 100. So then I can read it as about 10% of my orders are going to be from technology, 60% are going to be groceries, and 30% are going to be clothing. Okay, so let's hit apply. And if I have a look at my preview, I should see that I've got definitely more grocery orders there as I scroll down. you can sort of eyeball that and see that that's definitely working there. Okay. Cool, so we're almost there. The last thing we need to do is create our sales value. So let's add another field. This is going to be sales. And if I wanted to, again, I could just have this as a random number. But if I did that, we might end up having some absolutely huge groceries orders and some maybe quite small technology order sales values, and that wouldn't really make that much sense. So I actually want to create a sales value based on the category that that order is for. So I'm going to use something called scenarios in this case, and it's kind of similar, I guess, to this custom list distribution, but obviously we're going to be generating a numeric value in this case. Okay, so I need to create a scenario, but before you click on scenario, please do not do that now. You need to make sure you save your schema. If you actually click on any of these other tabs, you will lose your new schema unless you've saved it. So just go ahead and click save the schema. This is going to be my orders schema. And click save. Okay, so now we can go back to that once we've created our scenarios to update it. Okay, so let's go to our scenarios tab up at the top, and I haven't got any in at the moment. That's just because I deleted them all. So I can now go to create a scenario. You can give your scenario a name. At this point, the name of your scenario doesn't really matter. It can be whatever you want. So I'm just going to call it category scenario. And then the next bit is where you can actually specify for which column you want this scenario to reference and what do you want to happen when you've got the different values for that column. So the column where it says my column, I'm going to update that with category because I want it to reference my category column. And my category has 3 different values. These are the values that I created. So I can just put in technology. Then I can add another row for a new value of category, which is going to be groceries. And then I can add my final row, which is going to be for clothing. Okay, so now you can see this is a little bit like, or very, very similar actually to the normal distribution field that we were using. I have a normal distribution that I will reference for each time I get a category with the value technology or groceries or clothing. So it's going to reference that different distribution and give me a different value from a different range for every single category. You can also use a Poisson distribution in scenarios. It is only the normal or the Poisson distribution, but I'm just going to be using the normal distribution for now because we're just going to be trying to reference that bell curve of prices. Okay, so your mean and standard deviation will work the same as it did for age, obviously. So for technology, I'm going to put in a mean of £800. I think my average technology order from my superstore is going to be about £800. But it's going to have quite a large range of prices. So I want my standard deviation to be quite high. If I only had it as 2, obviously everything's going to be very, very closely priced around £800, which wouldn't make much sense in the real world. So I'm actually going to put in a standard deviation of 100, which would give me about 99% of my observations and 99% of my records will be between 500, so 3 standard deviations away from the mean, so 500 and 1100. So you're getting that kind of good range of values there. For groceries, I think an average grocery order of around 50 is okay. So I can then add in, I'll put a standard deviation in of 10. Okay, so I'll have about 99% of my data, 99% of my groceries orders are going to be between 20 and 80. And obviously all these categories, again, if we remember, that's going to be coming from our custom distribution. So we're still going to have less technology orders. They're just going to have a higher value. We're going to have more grocery orders and they're going to have a lower value. And then for clothing, I'm going to have my average as 100. And again, I want my standard deviation to be 10. Okay, so I'll have 99% of my clothing orders will be between 70 and 130. Okay, so let's save that scenario. Now, one thing to note here is that you need to make sure that your spelling and your cases are all the same from your column name and your column value. So just double check those and make sure that they're all okay. Okay, so I'll save that scenario. And now I can go back to my schemas and I can go to my order schema. And my sales value here, which I've currently got as number, this is what I want to update to reference my scenarios. Okay, so I'll go and type in scenario in my data type search there, click on scenario, select a scenario. I've obviously only got one, which is my category scenario, and that's it. I actually don't have to fill out any more parameters for that field name there. So this is why it's quite important that you make sure you've got the correct spelling for the field name, because it now is going to know to reference category, and then obviously the correct spelling for those values there. Okay, so I can leave this as 1,000 rows. That's absolutely fine, just like so. And then I can download that data. But before I do, always a good idea to check your preview, just to make sure we don't have any sort of formula errors going on here. Okay, so then I can have a look and go down my sales values, and I can see that my technology orders, obviously I've got less of them, but that's definitely much higher sales value there. My clothing orders are kind of looking all around the 100 value, which is what I wanted. And then my groceries orders, I've got more of those, and they're all at slightly lower sales value. And then I've got my different store IDs there. So I can go ahead and download that data. And now if I wanted to, I could go and take these into Tableau and reference them, and they should link up. So let's have a little go at that. So let's go into Tableau. So if you don't have Tableau, you can just watch me as I do this one. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and search through my downloads for these two different things now. So I've got my orders. Actually, I'm going to start with my Superstore data set and open that. Okay, so now I can see I've got my Superstore data set. This is the one that I just downloaded. It's got that frequency column in there. Now I know I actually don't want to use that, so I can go ahead and hide that. Okay, and now I can add one more connection now, which is going to be my orders. Okay, and then I can go ahead and join those two things together. Actually, you might want to join it, or you might want to create a relationship. It's completely up to you. What I'll do is just join it. So where are my orders here? Here we go. Sorry, create a relationship between them even, not join it. Okay, so you can see it's automatically referenced the store ID from Superstore and the orders data set. So that is the correct linking field. So I can now go to a brand new sheet, and I can have a look for across all of the different cities that I've got. Maybe I want to know what is the total sales value for all of these. So I can then go and drop my sales on color. So even though I had my various different orders from the various different stores, but I didn't have the actual location of that store in my orders data set, you can see that that linking has actually worked, and I can see exactly where all of my different orders happened, how much they came to, and that it's across those different countries. And if I want to have a look at the different distributions that I made, I can do that as well. So we can go ahead and look at category. And then let's have a look at the total sales value for category. Obviously, we've got technology has got many more higher value sales there. But if I actually have a look at how many orders there were, we can see that groceries has got the most. Okay, change that to entire view. Okay, so there we go. So that is Mockaroo in action. So hopefully you guys managed to follow along with that. We've got 4 minutes for a Q&A now. So if you've got any questions, let me know, pop them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them. If not, feel free to drop off, and thank you for joining. Got a Q&A here. Any way to avoid non-English characters in names? These aren't saved correctly in a CSV. That's a good question. I'm not sure if they actually come up if you pick like the full name option. I don't know if you get any non-English characters in names unless you found some, but I'm not too sure. So it's a good question. But if they're not saved correctly in a CSV, you can download things as an XLSX or in other formats as well. So you might just want to try and download them in a different way. Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Mockaroo also works with Tonic, which anonymizes existing datasets. Any experience with this? I haven't got any experience with that, I'm afraid. No, sorry. That sounds really useful. It's definitely something to Google there. Had no idea it was so powerful and flexible. Great demo. You're welcome. Thank you for joining. It is a really, really useful tool. So yeah, definitely check it out and see if you can make use of that. Cool. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Tim. Okay, cool. Well, I think we'll leave it there if we haven't got any more questions. So thanks everybody for joining, and I hope you have a great day.